Welcome, dear one. Thank you for finding your way here tonight. Whatever has brought you to this moment, weariness, worry, the simple need for rest, you are welcome. There is space for you here. Space for all of you, exactly as you are. Tonight we gather around the theme of compassion. Not the loud compassion of rescue or fixing, but the quiet compassion that simply sees, that simply stays, that offers presence without needing anything in return. This is the compassion of monks who sit with the dying, of villagers who notice strangers in need, of ordinary people who choose, again and again, to soften rather than harden in the face of suffering. Before we enter the stories, take a moment to notice where you are. The surface beneath you, the temperature of the air, the weight of your body as it settles. There is nothing you need to change, nothing you need to improve. Just this moment, just this breath, just this quiet arriving. The stories tonight will carry you through different landscapes, through forests and villages, beside rivers and within temple walls. You'll meet healers and hermits, children and elders, those who suffer and those who stay beside them. Each story is an invitation to soften, to open, to remember that compassion is not something we do, but something we allow ourselves to become. You don't need to hold on to every word. Let the stories wash over you like warm water. If sleep finds you early, that is perfect. If you drift in and out, that too is exactly right. These stories will continue whether you hear them or not, keeping watch beside you as you rest. So let your eyes close now, if they haven't already. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your breath find its own natural rhythm, like waves on a shore, coming and going without effort. The night is here. The stories are waiting, and we begin. In a forest at the edge of a small kingdom, there lived a woman named Yuki who was known as a healer. She had not trained in any formal way, had not studied with famous physicians or learned from ancient texts. She had simply grown up in the forest, raised by her grandmother who knew the plants, and over time she had learned their ways. Yuki's cottage was small, built of wood and stone, with a thatched roof and a garden that grew in organized wildness around it. People from nearby villages would come to her when they were ill or injured, and she would tend to them with herbs and poultices, with teas and salves, but mostly with a quality of attention that made people feel seen. She was not young anymore. Her hair was silver, her hands marked by years of work in the garden and the woods. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if hurrying would disturb something delicate in the air. One autumn afternoon, as the light slanted golden through the trees, a man came stumbling down the forest path toward her cottage. He was young, perhaps 20, and his face was twisted with pain. His right hand was wrapped in a cloth already soaked through with blood. Yuki was in her garden, cutting the last of the chrysanthemums. She looked up at the sound of his approach and set down her basket immediately. "Come," she said simply, gesturing toward the cottage door. Inside, she had him sit at her wooden table while she unwrapped the cloth from his hand. The cut was deep, across his palm, still bleeding freely. He must have been holding something when he fell, she thought. An axe, perhaps, or a blade. "This will need stitching," she said quietly. "It will hurt, but it must be done." The young man nodded, his face pale. "I can bear it." Yuki moved to her shelves and began gathering what she needed: clean cloth, needle and thread boiled that morning, a tincture of willow bark for pain, yarrow to stop the bleeding. She worked without rushing, her movements calm and sure. As she cleaned the wound, the young man hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. "What is your name?" Yuki asked, her voice soft. "Takeshi," he managed. "Takeshi, I am Yuki. You're doing well. Keep breathing." She threaded the needle, held it briefly in the flame of a candle to ensure it was clean, then began to stitch. Her hands were steady. Each stitch was placed with care, pulling the edges of the wound together, not too tight, not too loose. Takeshi gripped the edge of the table with his free hand, his knuckles white, sweat beaded on his forehead. But Yuki continued speaking, her voice low and even, a kind of anchor. "The body knows how to heal," she said as she worked. "Our job is just to help it, to give it what it needs, clean the wound, bring the edges together, then we wait. The body does the rest." "How did you learn this?" Takeshi asked, his voice tight. "My grandmother taught me. And before that, her grandmother taught her. But mostly, I learned by watching, by paying attention. The plants teach you, if you listen. The body teaches you. Suffering teaches you." She tied off the last stitch and cut the thread. Then she applied a paste of yarrow and honey to the closed wound and wrapped it in clean cloth. "There," she said. "It's done." Takeshi let out a long breath. "Thank you." Yuki poured him a cup of willow bark tea, still warm from the pot on the hearth. "Drink this. It will help with the pain. And rest here for a while. You shouldn't walk yet." Takeshi drank the tea slowly. The cottage was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the distant sound of wind in the trees. The light through the window was softer now, deepening toward evening. "Why do you do this?" Takeshi asked after a while. "Help people, I mean. Do they pay you?" Yuki smiled slightly. "Sometimes they bring food, sometimes firewood, sometimes nothing. It doesn't matter. But you could charge. You could live more comfortably." "I live comfortably enough," Yuki said. She was tidying her supplies, returning things to their proper places on the shelves. "I have what I need. And this work, it's not about payment. It's about what I can offer, what I'm here to do." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," Yuki said. "Someone is suffering. I can help ease that suffering. Why would I not?" Takeshi was quiet, considering this. His hand throbbed, but the tea was beginning to dull the pain. "I was angry today," he said suddenly. "That's why I was careless. That's why I cut myself. I was angry at my father, at my life, at everything. And I was swinging the axe too hard, not paying attention." Yuki nodded. She pulled a stool over and sat across from him. "Anger is like that. It makes us blind. We stop seeing what's in front of us." "I don't know how to stop being angry," Takeshi said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something young and lost. "You don't have to stop," Yuki said gently. "Anger is just a feeling. It comes, it passes, but you can learn to hold it differently, not to let it drive you, not to let it make you blind." "How?" Yuki looked at him for a long moment. "By being kind to it, by being kind to yourself. When you feel anger rising, you can notice it. You can say, 'Here is anger. Here is pain underneath the anger.' And then you can choose what to do. You can swing the axe blindly, or you can set it down and breathe." Takeshi's eyes filled with tears. He looked away, embarrassed. "It's all right," Yuki said softly. "Tears are just water. They don't mean you're weak. They mean you're feeling something true." She stood and moved to the window, giving him space. Outside, the forest was settling into dusk. The trees were dark shapes against a pale sky. After a while, Takeshi wiped his face with his sleeve. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Yuki said, turning back to him. "You came here bleeding, and now you're less so. That's what matters." She smiled, and it was a smile of such warmth and lack of judgment that Takeshi felt something in him ease, some tight knot begin to loosen. "Stay for dinner," Yuki said. "I have soup. It's just vegetables, but it's warm. I don't want to trouble you." "It's no trouble, I made enough." They ate together as the last light faded. The soup was simple root vegetables, miso, a little seaweed, but it tasted good. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable. When it was fully dark, Yuki lit a lantern for Takeshi to carry home. At the door, he turned to her. "Thank you," he said, "for the stitches and for the rest." "You're welcome," Yuki said. "Come back in 3 days. I'll check the wound, change the bandage." Takeshi nodded, then hesitantly, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever feel angry? Do you ever suffer?" Yuki's face softened. "Yes, I'm human. I feel everything. Anger, sadness, fear. But I've learned that suffering is less when we meet it with kindness. When we stop fighting it and just hold it gently, like holding an injured bird, not squeezing, just present." Takeshi nodded slowly. "I'll try to remember that." "Good," Yuki said, "and be gentle with yourself. Healing takes time." She watched him walk into the forest, the lantern light bobbing between the trees until it disappeared. Then she closed the door and returned to the fire. She sat there for a long time, hands folded in her lap, feeling the warmth on her face. She thought of all the people who had come to her over the years, the wounds she had stitched, the fevers she had cooled, the pains she had eased. But more than that, she thought of the suffering she had witnessed, the fear and loneliness and anger that lived beneath the physical symptoms. And she felt grateful that she could offer something, not a cure, not always, but presence, attention. The quiet message that you are not alone in this. Outside, the forest rustled with night sounds, owls calling, small creatures moving through the undergrowth, the wind in the high branches, and Yuki sat beside her fire, a keeper of small kindnesses, a tender of wounds both seen and unseen, simply here, simply available, simply willing to witness suffering and respond with care. The night deepened around her cottage, and the fire burned low, and somewhere in the darkness a young man walked home holding a lantern, and a new possibility that pain could be met with gentleness, that anger could be held without drowning in it, that healing was always, always possible. In a village built along the curve of a slow river, there was a bridge made of stone that had stood for hundreds of years. It was not a grand bridge, not ornate or particularly beautiful, just a simple arch that connected one side of the village to the other. Children played on it, merchants crossed it with their carts, and in the evenings people would lean on its railings and watch the water flow beneath. Beside this bridge lived an old man named Hiro. His house was the smallest in the village, barely more than a single room with a tiny kitchen and a sleeping mat in the corner. Hiro had lived there for as long as anyone could remember. He had no family, no trade, no obvious purpose, but everyone knew him, and everyone, in their way, looked out for him. Hiro spent most of his days sitting on a bench near the bridge, watching people pass. He would nod to them, sometimes speak a few words of greeting, but mostly he just sat. His face was deeply lined, his back bent, his movements slow and careful. He wore the same faded robe every day, patched and repatched over the years. To an outsider, Hiro might have seemed like a forgotten man, someone left behind by time. But the villagers knew better. They knew that Hiro saw things others missed, that he noticed when someone was troubled, when a child was sad, when a person needed something they couldn't name. One morning in early spring, a woman named Sachiko came to the bridge carrying her young daughter, who was perhaps 4 years old. The child was crying, inconsolable, her face red and streaked with tears. Sachiko looked exhausted, at the end of her patience. "I don't know what's wrong," Sachiko said to no one in particular, jostling the child in her arms. "She's been crying all morning. She won't eat, won't play, just cries and cries." Hiro, sitting on his bench, looked up. He watched the child for a moment, then stood slowly, using his walking stick for support, and approached. "May I?" he asked Sachiko quietly, gesturing toward the child. Sachiko hesitated, then nodded. She was desperate enough to try anything. Hiro came closer and bent down slightly, bringing his face level with the child's. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to touch her. He just looked at her with his calm, wrinkled face and his soft eyes. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're having a hard morning." The child's crying quieted slightly, reduced to hiccuping sobs. She looked at Hiro with wide, wet eyes. "Sometimes everything feels too big, doesn't it?" Hiro continued. "Too loud, too bright, too much, and you don't have words for it yet, so you cry. That's all right. Crying is good. It lets the too much out." The child stared at him. Her breathing was still ragged, but she had stopped wailing. "Your mama loves you very much," Hiro said. "She's tired, but not because of you. She's tired because she works hard to take care of you. And right now, she wishes she could take away whatever is hurting you. But she can't. No one can. We can just be here with you while you feel it." Sachiko felt tears prick her own eyes. She hadn't expected this old man to name exactly what she was feeling. Hiro straightened slowly and turned to Sachiko. "She'll be all right. Sometimes they just need to move through it. Could you sit here with me for a moment?" Sachiko sat on the bench, settling her daughter in her lap. The child was quieter now, her sobs subsiding into occasional shudders. Hiro sat beside them, saying nothing, just a presence. The river flowed beneath the bridge. A cart rumbled past. Birds called from the willow trees that lined the bank. After a while, the child's breathing evened out. Her eyes drooped. She leaned her head against her mother's chest and was still. "She's exhausted," Sachiko whispered. "Yes," Hiro said. "Feeling everything is exhausting." Sachiko looked at him. "How did you know what to say?" Hiro smiled slightly. "I didn't know. I just looked at her and tried to see what she might be feeling. And then I said it out loud. Sometimes that helps. Being seen." "You have children?" "No," Hiro said. "I never married, but I've lived a long time. I've felt many things, and I remember what it's like to feel something so big you think it will swallow you whole." Sachiko nodded. They sat in silence, watching the river. The child slept. "Thank you," Sachiko said eventually. "No need for thanks," Hiro said. "I was just here." But it wasn't true, and Sachiko knew it. He hadn't just been here. He had been present. He had seen. He had offered the simplest, most profound gift, witnessing without trying to fix, without judgment, without needing anything in return. As the days passed, word of that morning spread quietly through the village, not as gossip, but as a kind of knowing. Hiro, sitting by his bridge, was more than he appeared. He was someone who could hold space for suffering without flinching, without turning away. People began coming to him, not with requests or questions, but just to sit, to be near someone who could tolerate pain without needing it to stop immediately, who could let feelings be what they were without rushing to solutions. An elderly woman whose husband had died came and sat beside him and wept. Hiro said nothing, just sat with her, and eventually she stopped weeping and said, "Thank you for letting me be sad." A young man who had lost his job and felt ashamed came and sat and spoke his fears into the air. Hiro listened without advising, without platitudes, and the young man left feeling somehow lighter, as if the fears, once spoken and heard, had less power. A teenage girl who felt invisible in her own family came and sat in silence. After a long while, she said, "I don't know why I came here." "That's all right," Hiro said. "You don't need to know. You're welcome anyway." The girl cried then, quietly, and Hiro simply sat with her until she was done. One evening, the village headman, a stern and practical man named Kiyoshi, came to the bridge. He found Hiro sitting as usual, watching the water turn gold in the setting sun. "Hiro," Kiyoshi said, somewhat formally, "I've been meaning to speak with you." "Sit, if you like," Hiro said, gesturing to the bench. Kiyoshi sat, though it clearly made him uncomfortable. He was not a man accustomed to sitting idly. "People come to you," Kiyoshi said, "with their troubles. Why?" "I don't know," Hiro said honestly. "I don't do anything." "Exactly," Kiyoshi said. and there was something in his voice, confusion, maybe frustration. You don't advise them, you don't solve their problems, you don't even tell them it will be all right. So what good does it do? Hiro considered this. Maybe the good is in not doing, in just being with them, in saying, I see you, your suffering is real, I won't run from it. But that doesn't change anything, Kiyoshi said. Doesn't it? Hiro asked gently. When you suffer alone, it's one weight. When someone sits beside you while you suffer, sees you, acknowledges it isn't that different. Kiyoshi was quiet. He looked out at the river, at the way the current moved, always moving, never stopping. My wife is ill, he said suddenly, his voice rough. The physicians say there's nothing to be done. She has perhaps a season left, maybe less. Hiro turned to look at him. Kiyoshi's face was tight, controlled, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know how to bear it, Kiyoshi said, and the admission seemed to cost him everything. I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to lead, but I'm drowning. I know, Hiro said softly, and they sat there as the sun sank lower, as the light faded from gold to pink to purple, and Kiyoshi wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with deep, shuddering breaths, years of held grief finally finding release. Hiro didn't touch him, didn't speak. He just sat beside him, a steady presence, a witness to the breaking. When Kiyoshi finally quieted, when the tears had run their course, he wiped his face with his sleeve and said, voice hoarse, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Hiro said. Grief is love with nowhere to go. It needs to be felt. How do you know these things? I've lived, Hiro said simply. I've lost people. I've been broken. I've learned that the only way through pain is through it. Not around, not over. Through. Kiyoshi nodded slowly. Will you? Could I come again? Just to sit? Of course, Hiro said. Anytime. In the weeks that followed, Kiyoshi came to the bridge often, sometimes to sit in silence, sometimes to speak of his wife, of his fear, of his love. And Hiro sat with him, a constant, compassionate presence. When Kiyoshi's wife finally passed, Hiro was among those who came to the funeral. He said nothing, offered no words of comfort or wisdom. He simply stood beside Kiyoshi as the body was prepared, as prayers were said, as the village gathered to pay respects. And afterward, when everyone else had gone home and Kiyoshi stood alone in his empty house, he remembered Hiro sitting beside him on the bench, and he understood, finally, what the old man had given him. Not answers, not solutions, just companionship in the dark, just the willingness to be present with suffering, just the quiet, radical act of not turning away. That night, Hiro sat by the bridge as he always did, watching the stars reflect in the dark water. He thought of Kiyoshi, of Sachiko and her crying child, of all the people who had come to him seeking something they couldn't name, and he felt grateful that his life, small as it was, solitary as it was, could still offer something, that his presence, his willingness to witness, his capacity to hold space for pain, that these quiet, simple things could matter. The river flowed beneath the bridge. The stars wheeled overhead, and Hiro sat in the darkness, a keeper of sorrows, a tender of hearts, simply here, simply willing, simply open to the endless variations of human suffering and the equally endless capacity of compassion to meet it. In the mountains, where snow falls early and stays late, there was a monastery so remote that few people knew it existed. It took 3 days of difficult walking to reach it, up steep paths and through forests of dark pine. The monks who lived there had chosen that remoteness deliberately. They sought a life of contemplation, of silence, of turning inward. Among these monks was one named Ren. He was perhaps 35, with a shaved head and a quiet manner. He had been at the monastery for 10 years, and in that time he had become known among his brothers for his steadiness, his patience, his capacity to sit with difficulty without becoming disturbed. The monastery followed a strict schedule: meditation at dawn, work in the morning, study in the afternoon, meditation again in the evening. Meals were simple and eaten in silence. Speech was allowed only during certain hours and only when necessary. It was a hard life, demanding, but the monks had chosen it. One winter, in the deepest cold, a stranger appeared at the monastery gates. It was late afternoon, nearly dusk, and the snow was falling thick and steady. The stranger was a young man, perhaps 20, and he was clearly in distress. His clothes were inadequate for the cold, his face was pale and pinched, and he could barely stand. The gatekeeper brought him inside immediately and called for Ren, who served as the monastery's hospitaller, caring for any sick or injured monks. Ren came quickly, took one look at the young man, and helped him to the small infirmary room. The stranger was shivering uncontrollably, his fingers and toes white with cold. Frostbite, Ren thought, and likely exhaustion. He worked efficiently, warming water, preparing hot tea with ginger, bringing blankets. He removed the stranger's wet clothes and wrapped him in dry robes, then covered him with layers of quilts. The young man's teeth chattered so hard he couldn't speak. "Don't try to talk yet," Ren said quietly. "Just rest, get warm." He fed the stranger small sips of hot tea, held the cup to his lips when his hands shook too much to hold it himself. Gradually, over the course of an hour, the violent shivering subsided. Color began to return to the young man's face. "Thank you," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "Rest," Ren said. "We'll talk later." But the young man shook his head. "I need to tell you. I need to say it." Ren settled on the stool beside the bed. "All right, I'm listening." "I ran away," the stranger said. Tears began streaming down his face. "I'm a coward. I was supposed to marry a woman my family chose. A good match, everyone said. But I didn't love her. I couldn't do it. So I ran, just walked away. Left her, left my family, left everything. And now I'm lost. I don't know where to go. I don't know who I am." He wept then, deep sobs that shook his body. Ren sat quietly, letting him cry. After a while, the young man's weeping subsided. He wiped his face with the blanket. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for this." "It's all right," Ren said. "You're safe here. You can stay until you're strong enough to decide what comes next." "But I'm a coward," the young man said, his voice bitter. "I dishonored my family. I hurt someone who trusted me. I deserve to be lost in the snow." Ren looked at him for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Daichi." "Daichi, listen to me. Running away doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human. You were faced with a choice that felt impossible, and you chose the only path you could see. That took courage, actually. Not the kind people praise, but courage nonetheless." "How can you say that?" Daichi asked. "I hurt people." "Yes," Ren said simply. "You did, and you'll have to live with that. But causing pain doesn't make you evil. It makes you imperfect, like everyone else. The question isn't whether you made mistakes. The question is what you do now." Daichi stared at him. "What can I do? I can't go back." "Maybe not," Ren said. "But you can go forward. You can learn from this. You can become someone who causes less pain, who makes choices more consciously. You can forgive yourself, which is harder than anything else." "How do I do that?" "Slowly," Ren said. "With patience. By seeing yourself clearly, both your failures and your humanity. By practicing compassion toward yourself the way you would toward a friend who made a mistake." Daichi closed his eyes. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to know yet," Ren said. "For now, just rest, heal. The rest will come." Daichi stayed at the monastery for 3 weeks. He was too weak at first to travel, and then the snow became too deep, closing the paths down the mountain. So he remained, living alongside the monks, following their schedule as best he could. Ren spent time with him each day, not counseling him, not teaching him, just being present. They would sit in the meditation hall together, or walk in the snowy courtyard, or work side by side in the kitchen preparing meals. Slowly, Daichi began to soften. The harsh self-judgment that had driven him up the mountain began to ease. He started to see his situation not as evidence of his fundamental wrongness, but as a difficult moment in a life that would contain many difficult moments. One afternoon, as they sat together in the infirmary where they had first met, Daichi said, "Why are you so kind to me? You don't know me. I came here as a burden." Ren smiled slightly. "You're not a burden. You're a person in pain, and pain calls for compassion, not judgment. But I did wrong, yes, and you're suffering because of it. That suffering is punishment enough. What you need now is not more condemnation, but help finding a way forward." Daichi was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Is this what you do here? Practice compassion?" "We try," Ren said. "It's the heart of our practice. We meditate to quiet the mind, to see clearly, so that we can respond to suffering ours and others with wisdom and kindness instead of aversion and judgment." "Does it work?" "Sometimes," Ren said honestly. "Sometimes I fail. Sometimes I judge, or turn away, or harden my heart. But I keep practicing, because the alternative, living with a closed heart, is worse." When the snow finally melted enough for travel, Daichi prepared to leave. He didn't know where he would go, but he knew he couldn't stay at the monastery. It wasn't his path. On the morning of his departure, he found Ren in the meditation hall. "I want to thank you," Daichi said, "for saving my life, and for seeing me as a human being, not a failure." "You did that yourself," Ren said. "I just sat with you while you did it." "Will you tell me one thing before I go?" Daichi asked. "How do I live with what I've done? How do I carry it?" Ren thought carefully. "You carry it by acknowledging it, by not running from it or pretending it didn't happen. You carry it by letting it teach you, shape you into someone more aware, more careful, more compassionate. And you carry it by forgiving yourself, not because what you did was right, but because you're human and humans need forgiveness to keep living." Daichi nodded slowly. "I'll try. That's all anyone can do," Ren said. They walked together to the gate. The snow had melted in patches, revealing brown earth beneath. The air smelled of thaw, of beginnings. At the gate, Daichi bowed deeply. "If I ever become someone worth being, it will be because of these weeks." "You're already someone worth being," Ren said gently. "You just couldn't see it yet." Ren watched Daichi walk down the mountain path until he disappeared into the trees. Then he returned to the monastery, to the meditation hall, to his seat. He sat and breathed and felt in his chest that familiar warmth, compassion, not just for Daichi, but for all beings caught in the web of their own confusion, their own mistakes, their own suffering. And he wished for them what he had tried to offer Daichi: presence without judgment, space to heal, the radical acceptance that says, "You are flawed and you are worthy. Both are true." Outside, the spring wind moved through the pine trees. Inside, the monks sat in stillness, and Ren breathed with them, one human among many, practicing the endless, essential work of keeping the heart soft, keeping the door open, keeping the light of compassion alive, even in the darkest, coldest places. In a coastal village where the sea met the land in a gentle curve of sand and rock, there lived a fisherman named Kenji who had fished those waters for 40 years. He knew every current, every reef, every place where the fish gathered. He was good at his work, reliable, respected. But Kenji carried a grief that everyone knew about but no one spoke of. 15 years earlier, his teenage son had taken a small boat out on a calm afternoon and never returned. The boat was found days later, capsized, far from shore. The boy's body was never recovered. In the years since, Kenji had continued fishing. He had to. It was his livelihood, his life. But the joy had gone out of it. He went through the motions, mending nets, checking lines, bringing in his catch, but it was mechanical, empty. People in the village treated him with a kind of careful kindness, giving him space, not pushing. But Kenji felt isolated in his grief, as if he were walking through the world behind glass, seeing everything but unable to touch it, unable to be touched. One summer, a new family moved to the village, a couple with a young son, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The father had taken work at the larger fishing operation down the coast. They rented a small house near the harbor. The boy's name was Haru, and he was curious and fearless in the way children can be. He would come down to the docks in the afternoons and watch the fishermen work, asking questions, offering to help. Most of the fishermen tolerated him, answered his questions briefly, but didn't encourage him. They were busy, and children on the docks could be a hazard. But one afternoon, Haru approached Kenji as he was mending a net. The boy stood at a respectful distance and watched, saying nothing. Kenji glanced at him. "Do you need something?" "No, sir," Haru said. "I just like watching. The way you do that. It's like making patterns." Kenji looked at the net in his hands. He had never thought of it that way. "I suppose it is." "Could I learn?" Haru asked. Kenji's first instinct was to say no, to send the boy away, but something in the child's earnest face made him hesitate. "It's not easy," he said instead. "I know, but I want to try." Kenji sighed. "All right, sit here." He showed Haru how to hold the needle, how to loop the twine, how to pull it tight. The boy's fingers were clumsy at first, but he was determined. He worked at it with a fierce concentration, tongue between his teeth, refusing to give up. As Kenji watched him, something unexpected happened. He felt a flicker of something in his chest, not quite warmth, not quite ease, but something, a lessening of the numbness. Over the following weeks, Haru came back every afternoon. Sometimes he helped with the nets. Sometimes he just sat and asked questions about the sea, about fishing, about the boats, and slowly, without quite intending to, Kenji began to teach him. He showed Haru how to read the weather, how to recognize which clouds meant a storm was coming. He taught him the names of the fish, how to tell their age by their size. He explained the currents, the tides, the way the moon pulled the water. Haru absorbed it all with delight, and Kenji, despite himself, began to look forward to the boy's arrival each day. One evening, as they sat together on the dock watching the sun set over the water, Haru said, "You're sad sometimes, I can tell." Kenji stiffened. "What makes you say that?" "Your eyes," Haru said simply. "They look far away, like you're looking for something." Kenji was silent for a long moment. Then, because the boy had somehow earned honesty, he said, "I had a son. He was about your age when I lost him, on the sea." "That's why you fish alone," Haru said, not a question. "Yes." They sat in silence. The sky turned pink, then orange, then deep blue. "I'm sorry," Haru said finally. "That must hurt very much." "It does," Kenji said, and it was a relief to say it out loud, to not pretend otherwise. "Is that why you help me?" Haru asked. "Because I remind you of him." Kenji looked at the boy, his wind-tousled hair, his sun-browned skin, his open, trusting face. Did he remind him of his son? Not really. His son had been quieter, more serious, but that didn't matter. "No," Kenji said slowly. "I help you because you want to learn, and because," he paused, searching for the words, "because it feels good to pass something on, to teach someone." "I'd forgotten that feeling." Haru smiled. "I'm glad you remembered." As the summer progressed, something shifted in Kenji. The numbness began to recede. He found himself noticing things again: the color of the water, the cry of the gulls, the feel of the sun on his face. He began to speak more with the other fishermen, to rejoin the life of the village in small ways. People noticed. His wife, who had lived for years with his silent grief, saw him smile one evening at dinner and felt tears of relief. "You're coming back," she said softly. Kenji nodded. "I think I am." One afternoon, Haru's father came to find Kenji at the docks. He was a quiet man, respectful. "My son talks about you constantly," he said, "about everything you're teaching him. I wanted to thank you for taking the time." "It's no trouble," Kenji said. "He's a good student." The father hesitated, then said, "I heard about your son. I'm sorry for your loss, and I want you to know Haru is precious to us. We trust you with him. That's not a small thing." Kenji felt something break open in his chest. He understood what the man was really saying. "I know teaching my son might be painful for you. I know you might be afraid, but I trust you. I see your goodness." "Thank you," Kenji said, his voice rough. "That means more than you know." At the end of summer, Haru's family had to move. The father had been offered better work in a town up the coast. Haru was devastated. On his last afternoon in the village, he came to find Kenji, who was preparing his boat for the next day's fishing. "I don't want to go," Haru said, tears streaming down his face. "I want to stay here. I want to keep learning." Kenji set down his work and knelt so he was eye level with the boy. "I know, but sometimes we have to go even when we don't want to. That's part of life. But I'll forget everything you taught me," Haru said. "No, you won't," Kenji said gently. "It's in you now. The knowledge, the skills. You can carry them with you wherever you go." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife, worn smooth with use. "This was my father's. He gave it to me when I was about your age. I want you to have it." Haru stared at the knife, then at Kenji. "But it's special. That's why I'm giving it to you," Kenji said. To remember that someone believed in you, taught you, cared about you. And maybe someday you'll teach someone else and give them something to remember too." Haru threw his arms around Kenji's neck, sobbing, and Kenji held him. This child who was not his son but who had somehow brought him back to life, and he wept too. After Haru's family left, Kenji stood on the dock and looked out at the sea. The water was calm, reflecting the late afternoon light, and he felt, for the first time in 15 years, at peace with it. He would never stop missing his son. The grief would always be there, a permanent part of his landscape. But it wasn't all he was anymore. He was also someone who could teach, who could care, who could open his heart to another child and give freely without needing anything in return. That was compassion, he realized. Not erasing pain, not fixing loss, but learning to live with it, to let it soften you instead of harden you, to let it open you to others' pain so you could meet it with understanding. He thought of Haru, holding the pocket knife, carrying forward the knowledge of nets and tides and the names of fish. And he thought of his own son, somewhere beyond finding, and he hoped he chose to hope that his son knew he was loved, that he always had been, that he always would be. The sea rolled gently against the dock, the gulls called, the sun sank lower, and Kenji turned back to his work, his heart full and broken and somehow impossibly whole. And now the story's quiet. The night deepens, the world settles into rest. You've traveled tonight through many forms of compassion. You've seen the healer who stitches wounds and tends to hidden pain, the old man who witnesses suffering without needing to fix it, the monk who offers presents to a stranger fleeing his mistakes, the fisherman who learns to love again after unbearable loss. These are not stories of grand heroism. They're stories of ordinary people choosing, again and again, to stay open, to not turn away, to meet pain their own and others with tenderness instead of judgment. As you rest here now, you might notice your own heart, the ways it has been hurt, the ways it has hardened to protect itself, the ways it still, despite everything, wants to open, wants to connect, wants to care. There is no wrong way to feel. No feeling that makes you unworthy of compassion, especially your own. If tonight brought up anything difficult, any old pain or new awareness, let it be here. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to understand it. You can just let it exist, the way the healer let the young man's anger exist, the way the fisherman let his grief exist, the way the monk let the stranger's shame exist. Compassion begins with allowing, with saying, "This is here, this is real. I don't have to like it, but I can hold it gently." So rest now, dear one. Let your body be held by what supports it. Let your breath continue its ancient rhythm. Let the darkness be a comfort, not a threat. The stories will stay with you, even as you sleep. They'll work in ways you won't consciously know, planting seeds, offering possibilities, reminding you that tenderness is not weakness, it's the strongest thing there is. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your own tender heart, however hidden, however protected. Sleep well. Sleep deep. Sleep in the knowledge that you are held by something vast and kind, that you are worthy of rest, that you are always enough. Good night.